to just start by asking, where you all see energy and environment fitting into the next session. Is it, are there going to be important issues that come up, or is it going to be kind of dwarfed by discussions of the budget and so on? Maybe we could start with you, Representative Keffer.
Well, if I'd have known you needed a job, I would have certainly said that to Evan too. So
Thank you.
I'm late to the game here. I think education will probably be everybody's 1A topic and should be. But if that's 1A, then water ought to be 1B. I think the time has come. We've had a good water plan since '95. We've never funded it. I think after the drought of record last summer, statewide drought of record, everybody's seen the sensitivity and problems of even running out of water, having to truck water again. Probably haven't done that since the 50s in some places. So I'm hopeful that we will, for the future of our state, future economic growth of our state, that we tackle that issue once and for all. So that's what I hope that will be one of the big focus of of the 83rd.
Mm-hmm. Senator Estes, you want to jump in there?
Ditto. Mm-hmm. Let me just say that, first of all, you have to start with the budget because it drives all things. And I know this is about energy and the environment, but we literally could come down here for 140 days and do nothing but pass the state budget and go home. Now, I don't recommend that because we do have some vexing problems. But whenever, this will be my 6th regular session, and we try to, dust off our crystal ball and look to the future. And many times at this point, before the legislative session, I've said, well, it's going to be about this, that, or the other, and been totally wrong. But having just heard Governor Perry last night, having heard Speaker Strauss this week, he came to Wichita Falls, having heard Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, they've all mentioned prominently our water issues. So it's something that those of us that have been around here a while have struggled with. The state water plan is actually nationally recognized. We are light years ahead of other states with our fantastic plan with the regional groups planning. But there again, the funding has been the vexing issue. So all of us, I think, are trying to scratch our heads to figure out, okay, how do we skin this cat, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Do you have thoughts on this, Senator Uresti? You're from an area, San Antonio, that's done a lot of thinking about water and is, viewed by a number of people as fairly progressive on this. I mean, what could the legislature do next session about water?
Well, I think San Antonio Water System, SAWS, has done a wonderful job with regard to conservation, of course, and trying to keep the ratepayers happy with keeping the rates down. And they've become a model, a national model for everyone to emulate. And they've been progressive. They've been ahead of the curve. So I think we need to look at how SAWS is handling things in San Antonio, and I think the other parts of the state could, and the country, of course, could learn from what we're doing. It's going to be a big issue, and to reiterate what's already been said this afternoon, it's going to be a huge issue. And going forward with the developments in the Eagle Ford Shale, et cetera, I think water is going to definitely rise to the top.
Mark, what do you see on water?
Well, first, can I clear the air about how you got your job? Because as astute a journalist as Kate is, she hasn't really figured out that what I was doing was what politicians do all the time, which is take an idea that's about to happen anyway and get credit for it by making a last-minute phone call to confirm something that was already cooked. Your question was, where does energy and the environment fit into the session? And I think it probably gets the most attention where they've talked about where at the intersection between energy and water consumption. Mm-hmm. And I think the two big areas of intersection are the role of water in hydraulic fracturing and the impact of hydraulic fracturing on water supplies, or potential impact. And then the role of water in electricity generation, which, you know, certain forms of generation are intensely water consumptive and certain require no water at all. And at some point, that's what people mean when they talk about the externalities that affect the cost of electricity, but that sometimes aren't priced in by the marketplace. And the cost of water at some point is going to start affecting the cost of electricity, as it's going to affect a whole lot of things about the Texas economy. The other area where I think energy issues, I tend to think that this session is going to be another budget and education dominated session, dwarfing all other issues. But, you know, through Chairman Keffer's leadership, we did something big on fracking last session. And I think that fracking continues to be an issue that is transforming a lot of things about Texas, about the electricity system, and also the sort of, you know, neighborhood and zoning policies. And I suspect that'll be an issue again in the coming session.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can talk a little about fracking. That was key legislation last session, that a law that mandated disclosure of the fluids, the fluid composition of fracking fluid, and on a public website, sort of well by well, and Representative Keffer, you were part of that. Can you talk about, you know, sort of how you see that, how well that legislation work, and is there anything further to do on, you know, the fracking issue, either broadly, the sort of chemical disclosure issues, or the water consumption element?
Isn't the shale plays amazing? I mean, we've got a group coming down from North Carolina next week who have never had oil and gas production at all in their state to speak of. And they have just found a shale formation in North Carolina. I mean, it's just like almost every week in the newspaper, we're reading about another shale find or a larger play than anybody thought. And Texas is blessed. Texas is the reason the budget is doing well, the reason we have money, or, you know, however that's going to play out, but is, you know, the linchpin of Texas is still oil and gas. The foundation of our economy is still oil and gas, and we are blessed so much, so well right now. And I, you know, the hydrofracking is certainly a huge reason, maybe the reason, of around the country, these formations that are now commercially viable. Where this is going to go this next session, I think it's sort of morphing from that focus on hydrofracking to well integrity. I think that's an issue of where people are now seeing, and the Railroad Commission, as we speak, is looking right now over the rules of casing, of well integrity. So I think it's sort of growing into a larger aspect and look at of how we do our business, and making sure that rules and regulations are updated and 21st century. So I think it's moving, but moving positively. We'll probably get into water and energy use here in a minute, of what the oil and gas industry is doing, but I think it's moving positively, and I think there are things that are being looked at that need to be looked at. I think obviously well integrity is a large sort of offshoot of fracking, and that's something that we'll be looking at very seriously also.
So that could mean some legislation in that area,
it could,
potentially.
It could. Like I say, Railroad Commission look at rules right now, and where that maybe is where we see voids or whatever that could be, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have thoughts on you know, sort of water use and fracking? I mean, how this is sort of pops up periodically. I think actually that was part of the bill last
Yeah.
session, to also disclose the amount of water in each well. I mean, you know, the volumes of water in fracking can go quite high in a given area, you know, not overall, you know, 1% to 2% of all state water use. But is that, with water such an important issue? Is that sort of a sub-area we should look at, or is that kind of part of a broader, water rethink? Maybe Senator Estes.
Well, I had a bill 2 sessions ago that basically said people that are doing fracking report to the state the amount of water you use in your fracking procedures, and that was helpful. But where we go from there is, they can use 3 to 5 million gallons of water. Can that be recycled? We've seen some pilot programs there. Can brackish water be used instead of fresh water? Just an interesting anecdote, there's a little old town in my district called Bellevue. It's got a very small little lake. One day I was driving by there and I was going to talk to a fellow that lived close to there, and the little town lake was dry. And he said, I said, wow, your lake dry? It was kind of predated the drought we've had. I said, why'd your lake go dry? He said, oh, we sold all the water to a fracking company. And they were fine with that because evidently they got quite a bit of money, but the little town lake, Bellevue's a very small place, by the way. But let me just go back to one thought about the budget. I don't know if you've ever seen a bumper sticker, but we ought to create one. Have you hugged your oil and gas producer today? Okay? I mean, to keep Austin weird, hug your oil and gas producer. You can have all these bumper stickers. Here's my point.
You wouldn't see that on the same car, though.
Probably not. Probably not. Probably not.
But here's my point. We have this wonderful thing called the Rainy Day Fund, which we don't like to use, but it has billions of dollars in it. Where did that money come from? Most of it came from oil and gas production. So I'm here to say, and my district is right in the epicenter of where the Barnett Shale has been developed. Tremendous strain upon the infrastructure of that area. These 3 million pounds per well of cement and steel and stuff that goes down the hole all comes in through roads. And so we've had a very tough time with the counties and the cities in these areas where they're drilling like crazy, keeping up with the infrastructure on the roads. So one success and one exciting thing leads to problems in other areas. But thank goodness we have this boom going on in our state and in the nation. And the experts tell me that if we do things right, we can be energy independent in a few years. I hope they're right, and I hope we do go down that road.
Well, one of the the long-term future for the price of natural gas is, I think, the most interesting question in finance today. Mm-hmm. And it's going to determine the fate of a whole lot of larger questions. And it's affected by questions like, what's the long-term future of the price of water in Texas? The Obama administration just this past week kicked to after the election a report that they have been preparing on the advisability of increasing the export of natural gas by liquefying it and putting it on ships and trying to reconnect the natural gas market here to the global natural gas market, because right now it's really deviated from oil prices because it's captive domestically, and we are oversupplied domestically in the prices that is so low. When people talk about the renaissance that's going on right now in American manufacturing, the first reason they give for it is lower energy prices deriving from low natural gas prices and the role that has in electricity prices. If we start exporting natural gas, it's going to be an even bigger windfall for the Texas energy industry than the one we've enjoyed in the past 5 years. But it's going to elevate electricity prices by increasing the price of natural gas. And that could undermine this manufacturing surge that we've had. And obviously consumers won't like it in the long run. Mm-hmm. Which is why I think it got pushed till after the election. Mm-hmm.
To follow on what Senator Estes said, come January, I'll represent 4 new counties, which will be in the heart of the Eagle Ford Shale in South Texas. And the counties down there, if you talk to the judges and the mayors, they too talk about the challenges that come with this tremendous boom that we're seeing because of this shale. I like to call them challenging opportunities, because there's some wonderful opportunities, yet there's some challenges that come with what's going on down there. One of the things I haven't heard in my discussions with different folks is with regard to water, because of the population growth that we see coming, there's going to be a greater demand on water, one. Two, with the infrastructure that will come with regard to roads and highways and the building of those, that infrastructure, there'll be an additional demand on water. So this discussion, I think, needs to be a top priority going into the next legislative session. One of the things that I've been kicking around and talking to different folks about is, because of the shale and the Barnett Shale, the Eagle Ford, and the Permian Basin, these are basically the golden goose, if you will, which is the reason why we have the funds we do in our rainy day fund. And if we don't protect the golden goose, then Texans, all of Texans, are going to suffer those consequences. So by that I mean, but one of the ideas we're looking at is proposing to take part of the monies going into the rainy day fund and investing that back into the shells with regard to infrastructure, et cetera, in order to protect the golden goose.
Yeah. Kate, can I, one story leave out there, talking about the amount of water in a frac job could be as much as 8 million gallons. I mean, it's depending on the depth and all that kind of stuff. Well, and just to not leave it where that's the way it is, take it or leave it, the oil and gas industry knows the sensitivity to fresh water. And as Senator Estes says, there's a lot of reuse, there's a lot of work going on in that direction. But also, I had the pleasure, I guess, of going and visiting a company in Arlington, a downhole, produces downhole equipment, and they have a patented idea that they're doing field testing right now on, where, like I said, a frac job may be in the millions, 8 million gallons, where they can get the same production from that well, but using this device, and only use 500 gallons. So again, that kind of ingenuity, that kind of work,
awesome.
That kind of thought is going on, that kind of game changer kind of, but that's where, proud to be an American, I guess. I mean, that's where ingenuity, that's where the need is there, and people try to fit that need. So, you know, that kind of stuff's going on in the industry also. So just to, you know that's certainly aware of the freshwater issue.
So imagine if 5 years ago we were having this panel and I had said, guys, 5 years from now, it will be essentially impossible to raise the capital to build a new coal-powered plant in America. You'd have said, no way, right? Or you would have said, only if it's through policy. That would have to be because Barack Obama becomes president and he enacts some regulation. That is the status quo today, with the exception of this heavily federally subsidized IGCC plant in Summit that's also Chinese subsidized. Essentially, there's no new building of coal power and none on the horizon because of hydraulic fracturing. And in the last 24 months, American CO2 emissions have gone down for the first time in our industrial history. And a little bit of that is because of the economic contraction, but my understanding is most of it is because we've migrated about 8% of our electricity portfolio from coal to natural gas, and some growth in renewables. Fracking has done more to reduce CO2 emissions than anything else in the last 50 years. It is the biggest threat to coal. It is essentially killing the coal industry. Win for Texas, bad for some parts of the country. But it is also the biggest threat to the evolution and continued development of the renewable energy industry in the economy. Because low-priced natural gas, low-priced electricity, my legislative director jokes sometimes that, every time he meets with somebody from the solar industry, they show him a chart that shows how in 3 years we're going to be price competitive without subsidy. And it's the same chart they've been showing for the last 8 years, right? And But their legitimate problem is that they were trying to hit a bogey that keeps getting lower, right? As the price of electricity, as the competitive price of electricity has gone down, the solar's ability to be competitive without subsidy has gotten harder and harder. And they've dropped their price 70% in the last 2 years, and they're still a long way from price competitiveness, because so has the competing price of electricity.
Right.
So there was a lot in there, and since you brought up solar, maybe we can just talk about that a little bit. There, obviously wind power here in Texas has gotten very big, close to 10% of the grid because of a mandate in 1999 and 05 for renewable power, and there have been efforts to bring solar, which is more expensive, on board, either through a mandate or some kind of rebate program. Where do you see that sort of falling in the legislature this coming year? I think actually in, 2009, Mark? There was a
We've
session.
come close.
Yes.
We've come close.
A solar
We've had-
session, but nothing
Yeah.
ultimately really happened. I mean, is there a place, is there anything the legislature, wants to do about solar at this point?
I can't speak for the legislature. I can
Yeah.
tell you what I want to do, and I've had a lot of help from Chairman Keffer working out the details of this. But what I think we ought to do to start is put solar panels on every public school in Texas that has a sturdy enough roof that isn't shaded by trees, and do that in order to reduce their utility costs and save local property taxpayers some money on the maintenance and operations of their school system. That seems to me a good first place to subsidize solar. Why would you want to subsidize solar? Why should one person pay for their neighbor to have solar panels? One reason is the experience we had in the wind industry, which by introducing low-price wind into the grid has brought down everyone's electric rates for all types of electricity by making the electric grid more competitive. It has also reduced emissions from our electricity generation portfolio in a way that allows our other manufacturing industries to thrive, because more emissions from electricity generation means less emissions allowable under the Clean Air Act from other sources. And it has generated enormous investment in the parts of the state that are generating wind power. I mean, it has made a lot of money for a lot of people in certain parts of the state. So those are good reasons. The other reason is we want solar we want Texas to be a leader in this industry. Natural gas has been, and we are still an oil and gas driven state. But there is a time horizon when renewables become as big a part of the energy industry as oil and gas. And we want Texas to benefit as much from a leadership position in that segment of the economy as we have from being the leader in oil and gas. And oil and gas didn't get where it got without subsidies. And renewables aren't going to get where they need to be without subsidies to stand them up. And we can do this in a smart way that doesn't give money to people who shouldn't have it. It means risk-taking. There's going to be companies you invest in that fail. There's going to be technologies that you invest in that don't work. But Jim and I talked about this a couple of months ago at a Trib event in Houston. We're here sponsored in part by the Mitchell Foundation. George Mitchell is the guy who brought hydraulic fracturing to the market. But he initiated the R&D process for hydraulic fracturing through the Department of Energy and a heavy federal subsidy of the R&D, because it's such a big investment that no private enterprise would take the risk on early stage R&D, pre-commercial R&D, to develop that technology. And so the federal government helped George Mitchell bring this technology to market, and then the private enterprise free market took that mantle and did what it's done for the Texas economy today.
Well, Senator Uresti, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, whether there's a need for the legislature to get involved in solar, because obviously, CPS Energy is moving forward with a huge solar investment, really on its own.
Right. Yeah, recently CPS in San Antonio signed a huge contract to venture into solar. And again, I think it's something like Mark said, that we as a state need to look at. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. We definitely are fortunate to have the oil and gas that we do, but in my district, we've actually started talking to some of those school districts with regard to the solar panels. I think it's a wonderful idea. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and they would be ripe for that opportunity. Of course, out in West Texas, I mean, there's plenty of sun, but along the same lines with wind as well. I was coming back from Del Rio yesterday, I think it was, or the day before, but there's turbines going up in Val Verde County. So I think we have to look at these other interests, not put all our eggs in one basket, because no one knows where we're going to be in 10 years, in 15 years, 20 years.
Representative Keffer, how do you see kind of the renewable energy subsidy question, I guess, essentially?
Well, it's tough, because exactly what Mark said, with the price of natural gas is the overwhelming issue right now. So anything we do with wind, and we've all been reading in the papers, the wind manufacturing layoffs because of the need, the
potential expiration of the federal production tax credit.
There's a lot of is very problematic in that industry right now, what to do or what not to do. So that's an issue. There's a I can't remember the acronym, but it's PACE, and they're for solar, and they are looking. We had I think an effort on residential. Now they're coming back to look at commercial on a payback program, which I think's got a lot of potential. I've been interested in looking at that, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's PACE, P-A-C-E.
It's the program that lets you finance a solar investment.
You're right.
Through your property taxes.
Through your property tax,
and
right.
then so that if you don't own the property long enough to get the payback from the solar investment, the remaining debt conveys with the property, and the entity that acquires the property gets the benefit of the solar installation that you capitalized, but also has to sustain the rest of the debt.
And one thing about commercial, because obviously you would own that commercial property longer than maybe a house ownership or that kind of thing. So anyway, I think there's programs out there. I think it will be a debate on what to do as far as renewables this next session, but I've always been open to, as Carlos said, to opening the bag as much as possible. I mean, again, I think Texas has certainly been out there with our wind, our now $8 billion investment in the CREZ line to bring power to the Metroplex or where the power is needed. So we're no slouch in that regard. I mean, I think we've certainly put our money where our mouth is, and for that very reason, I think we need to keep a program going for the benefit of what the money we've already invested. But natural gas, again, who would have thought? I mean, $3, less than $3 MCF natural gas, and so it's there. Now, Mark, and we all worked on, but Mark was the author of the infrastructure for natural gas, and I think we ought to go to fleets, ought to go to natural gas. I think we ought to encourage that all we can, but you got to have the infrastructure. A lot of, so we it's hard the chicken or the egg kind of thing to make sure that we do that, but you got to have the infrastructure to supply. And in the triangle, using TERP funds that Mark worked out, we are building that infrastructure, and that's a great thing. And again, Texas continues to step forward. We're not resting on any laurel anywhere, I don't think. We're trying to look at the wide spectrum, but keep it financially viable and keep it where the ROI is there, for everybody's future.
Well, one of the consequences of the abundant and cheap natural gas is the strains on the electric grid, and I talked a little about that this morning. We had a panel on that, but I'm wondering, that's been fairly sort of a well-advertised problem and situation. I'm wondering if there's
in the West Zone,
right, out where they're drilling a lot, and there's a lot of economic activity, a lot of congestion on the grid. Is there, maybe start with you, Senator Estes, is there a role for the Is this something the legislature's you're going to be keeping an eye on?
Well, the one thing I remember a few years ago when we had some rolling brownouts, it was the legislature's fault. Do y'all remember that?
Oh, it was the Senate's fault.
Absolutely.
That's the dang truth.
We obviously want to make sure the lights are on. This is, absolutely something we take for granted. An air-conditioned room, lights so we can see. It's a great concern to me, and every time we have a committee meeting, we ask that question. Are we going to be able to keep ERCOT? Are we going to be able to keep the lights on? Are we going to have the capacity we need for a blistering hot summer like we've had recently? And everybody is, wanting to stay very cool and keep their lights on. It worries me. To backtrack just a little bit, though, I see some dark clouds on the horizon for solar.
So to speak. That's the Senate.
Did you
I'm
backtrack just
sorry.
to get that line in, or did you
sorry.
have?
See, you wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise. But no, let me just say that was a joke, okay? For those of you that didn't laugh very much. What I want to say is we need a diverse energy portfolio, and obviously we need to look at solar. But this is a little bit above our pay grade, of course, but government, and especially the federal government, is not very good about picking winners and losers. And we've seen it with ethanol, we've seen it with Solyndra. Absolutely, we need to explore every area. And yes, natural gas prices have put a damper on some of this renewable energy. And it's why we had this, I had a bill to create this bioenergy council to kind of coordinate and see what people are doing on bioenergy. And we all know ethanol had a little bit of success, but there was a lot of problems there. But how, my question is, how do you know until you go down the road a little bit? So I want to see us look at everything, but I don't want to see us, what's the deal? Has anybody watched the Texas Hold'em? All in, push all your chips in on anything, solar, wind, anything. We need a balanced energy portfolio, and that's what we're working on. We talk a lot about that when we get together late at night.
Yeah, and I would say, actually, there's probably not a more vocal critic of the Emerging Technology Fund than I am, because I agree, we shouldn't be making investments in business ventures that have been unsuccessful raising capital in the private marketplace. What makes us smarter than the private venture capital folks? Where I think government, and I don't consider it picking winners and losers when we make pre-commercial R&D investments.
I'd agree with that.
And we've got a pretty successful track record in that area as a country. Even though when you're investing at that early a stage that a lot of those things are never going to come to fruition because you're at such an early stage in the life cycle. Relevant to that is the fact that we're here at the University of Texas, which is the place to study if you want to have a career in the oil and gas industry, and has been for 50 years, leading petroleum engineering and geochemical departments in the world, which has a virtuous cycle effect in the industry, right? We generate the leadership of the big oil and gas companies. They go run big oil and gas companies and donate generously back to the University of Texas, and we reinforce our leadership position in those disciplines. An area where most of what I talked about in terms of investing at the R&D level in renewables is really federal policy. An area where Texas could do something, though, is through its universities and by being leaders in those disciplines that are hopefully going to be the disciplines that drive the future of the renewable energy industry. You would want, it makes sense that University of Texas should be the place to study if you want to have a career in energy, period, not just oil and gas.
Well, and to add to Harvard of the High Plains, Texas Tech has certainly the wind lab. The National Wind Lab is at Texas Tech.
Yeah.
So I mean, and again, wind will be a player. It will be a player, as we all hope it will be, when we have a battery, a commercial battery that will store energy.
Yeah.
And be able to be used in that regard. And when that happens, I think we're close to that happening. And I think that will be a game changer. I think that will be certainly for that. But getting back to the West Zone, for just an example of what's going on right now, my real world job, we have iron foundries, and our biggest overhead obviously is energy, is furnace electricity. The congestion charge that we're paying these last 3 or 4 months, the congestion charge is greater than our energy usage. And I can't believe that anybody, when we were thinking about that anybody ever thought that that would be the case as far as a congestion charge. But it goes from your area, Craig, the West Zone is pretty much not El Paso, but to the Austin area. I mean, it's a big swath in the West Zone, so it's affecting a lot of well, the economy is being affected. So that's something I hope
So will CREZ fix that for you?
Well, eventually, but that's down the road. We're looking at what can be done in the immediate, in the present right now. So but that's an issue. Again, the growth, the oil and gas growth. We know what the problem is. We've been told what the problem is. We didn't know what some solutions will be. So that's what I'm hoping they're working on.
So I do think, I don't know if the PUC will dispose of this before we get back next session, but I do think resource adequacy needs to be on our agenda next session if it hasn't been addressed by the PUC. And I don't think there's a way to deal with it other than through the policy mechanism of capacity payments, right? And that's not going to be politically popular. You know, nobody's going to want to pay for electricity that by definition we're not using, right? Yeah. And yet, without it, we either have to do one of two things: allow very high prices during demand peaks, which is a less unpopular way of foisting the same price hike on consumers, but doing so without transparency, or tolerate an unreliable grid. And that's bad, you know, because for the reason you say, at some point that hits us politically as much as making people pay for electricity they're not consuming. Yeah. But it's also bad in the area that most politicians in this state are most proud of, which is it's going to affect our ability to recruit and attract businesses and grow businesses in Texas, because it is being used against us now in the marketplace. When we're recruiting companies against other states, what the other states are saying to these big manufacturers is, you don't want to go to Texas because you can't depend that they'll have enough electricity for you.
Well, another issue along those lines that just before we open it up to questions, I'd just like to hear a little more about is water. I mean, everyone seems to agree that water is a big and potentially limiting issue for this state. And so really my question is, you know, kind of what specifically should the legislature do? And if there's uncertainty about whether it'll do it, why is that? Because there does seem to be quite a broad agreement. You know, is the issue sort of money? Maybe Senator Uresti, I can start with you. What do you see being an obstacle here to doing something, and, you know, what should it be that we do?
Well, I think, you know, one of the thoughts that comes to mind is everyone's territorial about their water, you know, regional areas, county areas, et cetera. One of the things that we had been pushing throughout my district, it covers 50,000 square miles, is to develop the groundwater districts to begin with. But, you know, the water plan that one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, you know, has to be funded accordingly. And I think the last number was to the tune of $50 billion or something, you know, ridiculous. And we don't have that kind of money. But until we make it a priority, and until we start to, you know, the legislature makes the decision, we're going to appropriate X amount of dollars to fund it, we're not going to make that progress. We cannot continue to kick the can down the road. I remember when we first started talking about that, I guess it was 8 or 10 years ago, and the number was a lot less than the 50 billion. I don't recall the number, but it was probably half of that, and it wasn't that long ago. So, when, you know, hopefully this session, we have some great people here. The four of us might be the ones to start talking about that.
Representative Keffer, what do you see on that? I mean, why can't we kind of agree to do something about
Well,
water?
it's because it all boils down to money. You know, I mean, that's anything we ever do in Austin. You know, conservation, as Senator Uresti was talking about, one of the great things that SAWS has been able to do, we'll have to look at, you know, they're going to have to cut back. They won't be able to do ice carvings anymore at the Senate buffet. I mean, you know, they're going to have to cut back you know, on a lot of things that
No, we're going
maybe
to keep that
used to.
tradition alive.
But, you know, it's finding a consistent source of revenue for the 50 billion, 53 billion, whatever the price tag is now, over the years to do it. You know, when we got out of the drought of the 50s, you know, we didn't get to where we are by accident. Our leadership, when we got out of the drought of the 50s, looked down the road, and their vision got us to today, you know, with our growth of population and where we are. You know, we have to have that same vision. We have to be adults, and we have to have the same vision at going forward for the future of our state, the viability of our state, to get us down another 50, 60, 100, you know, whatever the case may be. And when you look at it, because we could pass a water plan by next June. But remember, folks, a new reservoir is about a 25 to 30 year project. A desal plant may be a 4 to 5 year with the pipeline, with the connection project. So, you know, you don't flip a switch and say, okay, we're there. And that's why it's so important this time, because of looking down the road, to trying to find new water sources, not just depending on the rain, as we have in the past, but to find new water sources, brackish water, desal, whatever the case may be, and new reservoirs. I mean, it's something that, because of the length of time it takes for these projects to come to fruition, we've got to start today. We should have started 10 years ago, unfortunately, but we didn't. But it's something we got to do today, and I hope the public of Texas, the citizens of Texas, will get behind it, because there are going to be those that will say, no, I don't want to spend a dime. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to spend money. And folks, those guys don't have your best interest at heart. We've got to look down that road. We've got to be visionary, and you've got to help the House, the Senate, the governor say that, yes, we want a viable Texas in 50, 60, 70, 100 years, however long we can go down that pathway, because it is something that we've got to do this time.
The one thing to add to that is what Laura Huffman from the Nature Conservancy has been saying, which is there is a cost of not spending the money in the water plan. And that cost has actually been, you know, with some rigor, estimated by the Water Development Board at a potential cost of $120 billion. Isn't that roughly the number, 116 or something? And now that number is the consequence if we don't do anything and we experience a drought of record, right? So the problem is it's not a direct trade-off. It's a certain expenditure of $50+ billion to execute the state water plan against an uncertain risk of $100+ billion if we don't spend it and we hit the drought of record and we experience the population growth that's projected over the next 40 years. I think there is another way that finances work into this, though, and I'm not an expert on this. Somebody would know this better than me. If you make those billions of dollars worth of investments in the water plan, you would presumably increase supply and thereby reduce the price of water. If you fail to do it and water gets more and more scarce, then the price of water goes up. And if fracking can't get to the point where it only needs 500 gallons of water, if residential consumers are competing with oil and gas and electricity generation and all the other things that put demand on our water supply, the price, if we don't do something about water supply, the price of water is going to be unsustainable for a lot of people. That's going to force conservation in ways that we're not going to like as consumers. So there's good reason to do something. That it is a problem of money. We have to find some way to capitalize these investments off the projected savings in the rates that making these investments ought to generate.
Is there a role for could the legislature, you know, sort of mandate conservation? I mean, you know, I know Lyle Larson is, you know, sort of saying that, you know, maybe year-round watering restrictions would be a good idea, really, potentially across the board. I mean, Senator, I'll give you the last word on
Well,
water.
I got to tell you, I got away for a little bit of vacation this summer, and I was in Colorado, and my neighbor called me, and they said, the city is videotaping your sprinkler going off on the wrong day. So we got over there and got that fixed. I don't know how it went haywire. No, yeah, something happened, electrical surge, I'm sure. But having said that, conservation absolutely has to be a part of our long-range plan. And let me just say, and I hope I don't sound like someone that kind of said something similar to this about we're not a red nation or a blue nation, we're the United States. But I remain an optimist because I think at the end of the day, Texans are going to do what's right, and they're going to look to the future. And here's my quote. We're not a South Texas, North Texas, East Texas, or West Texas. We're Texas. And we have a part of this state that has lots of water, and we have a part of the state that doesn't have a whole lot of water. But we're all Texans. And we need to reach beyond our regional boundaries, whether it's a basin or whether it's a district, and realize that we know where the growth is, we know where the water is, we know where it's dry, we know where the aquifers are. We're going to band together at the end of the day and do the right thing. I'm very optimistic about it.
Great. Well, on that optimistic note, are there some questions?